All right, so today I'm going to turn this piece of walnut here into a ring box. Now, the blank that I'm starting out with is a 3 by 3 by 3, and when I turn it, this right here is the end grain. I'm going to start off with that facing the wall. I'm going to turn across the grain. What that's going to give me is, with the grain facing the wall like that, it's going to give the top of the box the side of the grain, and it's going to give a very beautiful top. Now I'm going to mount this up real quick on the lathe, like so, and I'm going to turn this square piece into a tube and make it round. So I'm going to start out here, just hog away some material and make that round. And as you can see, doing that rather quickly with a bowl gouge, and I'm turning it down just to try to get no flat spots at this step right now. I'm not necessarily going for a shape or anything. I'm just trying to get the shape of the bowl or box down to a round cylinder, so that way I can put 2 feet on either end, and those will be what I'll grab with the chuck later on in the video. So right now it's getting pretty close. Just gonna stop the lathe real quick and check, see if there's any flat spots. There was a flat spot there, so I'm gonna just turn that off real quick and just take a little bit of my material. I'm just trying to shave it down. Don't need to take away a lot of material, just enough to get rid of that flat spot. All right, should about do it. And now I'm going to use the parting tool. I'm going to put these 2 little feet on the ends to grab with the chuck later on. Now, when I do these, I like to turn them down to about there. When I turn them down, what I'm looking for is, depending on the chuck you use, it's going to vary, but the chuck that I use, I like to turn it down to 2 inches, because that's what I find to be a comfortable area for the chuck to grab, and it leaves me a little bit of wiggle room. So that way, when I grab onto it, it's not at the bottom end or the top end of what the chuck can do. It's roughly in the middle, so that way it's a good grabbing ability of the chuck. Now I'm going to put one on both ends here, because to turn this box, we're going to split this blank and we're going to actually turn 2 different halves. I'll get to that when we get there, but this is just me hogging away a little bit of material, shave it down, make short work of it. All right, let's see. That's probably about right. And we'll just shave a little bit more off there. All right, there we go. So now we're going to stop lathe, check it. All right, everything was good. We're going to pull that off. We're just going to flip our stuff around real quick. So I'm going to take and put that chuck on. But first I have to take out the that drive center there. And so I'm going to just knock that out there, tap it out. I'm going to roll on I'm just going to thread on the chuck there. And so there we are. We got the chuck on. And now that the chuck's on the lathe, we can open it up a little bit and put our workpiece into the chuck. Now, when we grab onto the chuck, we're going to want to make sure that the chuck and the shoulder of the piece are tight. And when we turn it, you want to know whether you have a dovetail chuck or whether the jaws of your chuck are straight. I made these dovetailed in the same shape to mirror the chuck, so that way I will get the best fit possible. Now I'm just going to tighten this on. I'm going to put it on there pretty snug, so that way it doesn't move around on me. As snug as I can get it. And that's going to make sure it doesn't shift around too much. And it's going to keep the piece. I don't want to damage the workpiece, but I also want to make sure that the piece doesn't fly out if I get a catch or anything. So now we're going to bring up the tool rest, and we can take away that the tailstock there. And we're going to start this out. We're just going to use the parting tool real quick. Well, first I think I'll just take a Sharpie out real quick here, and I'll put a line here to show you what we're doing. So we're going to mark about there. So the end that I put into the chuck is going to wind up being the top of the box. And I'm just going to use the parting tool. That didn't show up as well on the camera as I thought it would, but we're just going to use the parting tool. I'm going to mark 3 areas. So I'm going to mark put a couple lines on the box there. And what that's going to tell me, it's going to tell me the top line is going to tell me where the bottom of the lid is going to be. And so the second line is going to tell me what's going to be removed. And then the third line there is going to be the part of the box that's going to be a tenon that goes into the lid, which is going to end up being like a mortise almost. It's going to look like, be pretty similar to mortise and a tenon, where you have a lip on one and it encloses the other. And so we're just going to shape this up. So as you can see, start taking away material there. Now I've reduced the center there, and I'm working down both sides, and the center here, I just got down to about the diameter that I want to go for the width of the inner lip of the box, and I'm going to now start parting out the bottom from the top. Now when I'm parting out the bottom of the top using the parting tool, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to stop early before I go all the way through. When it reaches about the width of my little finger there, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to take the tool and I'm going to just knock it off with the wooden handle of the tool. It doesn't take much force. It's because you're going to with the grain, so you're splitting it where it's weak. It's not, you shouldn't necessarily have to hammer it off. It's just a little bit of work, but you don't want it to fly and damage the workpiece if it drops on the floor, hits the lathe or something, causes a dent. And so right now I'm just trying to work it down. When I'm cutting through with a parting tool, I'm actually doing 2 lines next to each other, so that way I don't heat up the tip of the parting tool too much, and I don't get like a bind. So what I'm doing is I'm actually working about half the tool down one side, and then I'm working about edge with about half the tool on the other side there. And so now I've got down to a point where I feel comfortable breaking this off. I'm just going to tap it real lightly. I'm going to catch it with my hand, and you'll see light tap with the tool comes right off. All right, so now we've got our piece right here. This is the bottom there. You see how at the center of the lid we have a remnant of the piece that got broken off there. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to slap the bottom back in there, and we're going to start turning the inside of the base of this ring box. Now that we're turning the base of the ring box, the first thing we're going to do is I just want to make sure it spins true and that it's not wobbling or anything in the lathe, and that every now and then you get one that doesn't necessarily turn around, or you'll put it in the lathe and a piece of sawdust will keep it from sitting flush. So first thing I want to do is I want to check that. Now I'm just using a bowl gouge, 5/8 inch bowl gouge, just taking away a little bit of material on the inside there. You know, a ring's not necessarily that big. You fit a necklace in here too if you wanted to. Not necessarily large stuff, just small stuff. And so we're just going to take away a little bit. Don't need to use too much of the tool, just a tip. Work it around in there. Going to end up with a hole probably it's going to be about 1.25 inches deep at the deepest, and no bigger than probably about 1 7/8 inch at the widest, but realistically we're probably going to end up with about 1 3/4 right here. So I'm just checking to make sure that the edges are clean here. So while the box is like this with the inside turned, we're going to actually start our finishing process here. We're going to sand, and I'm going to watch as I go through the grits. I'm going to use I'm going to start off with an 80 grit. It's going to be a real rough grit. It's just going to be break any edge. If you have any tear out from the tool, try to get rid of that. The second grit that I'm going to be using here is I'm going to be using a 120 grit, and that's going to take off some of the lines from the 80 grit, and then we're going to move up to a 220, and that's going to take away the lines from the 120. And then once I hit about 320, that's going to be a comfortable level of grit where the lines are small enough you're not going to see them with the human eye once we put the polish on. And so we're just going to go through these grits, make sure I have them in the order. What I'm using is I'm using a quarter sheet that's actually folded over, so it's about the size of an eighth sheet of sandpaper here. I'm going to sand out that inside real quick. And it doesn't take much with these lighter grits here, because the amount of tear out I didn't really have much tear out starting. So all we're doing is we're just covering our bases, making sure it's real clean, and running through the grits, smooth it out a little bit. While we're on this fine grit, you saw me there, I touched up the edges of the box. And so now we're going to start off with finishing out the bottom here. And so with the bottom, what we're doing is we're putting the finish in there. We're just going to use a friction polish, so we're going to spin this up and put that in there. Once we have it in there, we just apply some heat, and the friction will actually make this finish become quite a nice gloss. All right, so there we are. Just wanted to check, make sure that the was glossing up. We're just gonna hit it with one more layer of that, and we should be about done. Just want to make sure that it's shiny or to an acceptable standard that I like. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, it looks about good. All right, so there you see, it's pretty shiny, flex light good. You see a little bit of the grain personality coming out there. So now I've mounted up the top of the box here, and we're just gonna start taking away a little bit of material on the inside. And so as we're gonna do that material taken away, we don't want to be too aggressive. We want to start out with just putting a ring in there. Now this ring is going to be slightly smaller than the base, so it won't fit into the base when we put it on there right away. It'll just go around the edges or sit on top. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by putting the ring in there, and then once we have a ring, we're going to use the bowl gouge here. Now we're just going to take this bowl gouge and we're going to cut essentially like a bowl, but we just want to go in about 1/4 of an inch or so to smooth out the top of the box and have a relatively smooth surface. We're not going to actually finish it, because when we get to put the top on, when you sand the top, you have a tendency to also sand the edges, and it opens up the gap that you have in there. So now I'm just going to open up the opening a little bit there, make that hole a little bit bigger. And so now we're going to check, make sure that the box fits. If it's a little bit small, that's good, because we can always make the hole bigger, but if the hole's too big, you can't add material back. So we're just going to shave off a little bit more before checking the box a couple times. If you have a caliper set, you could probably use that to get a relatively accurate way to do this once the first time. What I find is that it's pretty good to use a caliper set to get close, but once you get close, I like to check it up by hand. Anyway, I'm pretty good at guessing by eye, but I like to check up by hand and be on the safe side, because I find that every now and then the caliper set, you're a little bit off. And the nicer the fit of the ring box, if you can knock down a couple thousandths of an inch, you can really feel that in the end product. So now we're just going to shave away a little bit more till we get this to fit. When we get it to fit, we want the lid to fit snug, but we don't want it to fit too tight. We want it to fit so that it slides on. You can rotate it all the way around, but not necessarily to the point where you can shake it if you were to apply side to side force, or where you can feel slop in there. If you feel a little bit, that's okay. As long as it's just a little bit. Now, one of the keys is that we're trying not to have a lot. And when I say a lot, I'm talking in the hundredths of an inch. I'm not talking about 1/4 of an inch. If you have 1/4 of an inch, you're better off starting over again at that point. It's okay though. My first few, it took me a little bit to get to the point where I am now with these boxes. So right now you feel that's a little bit tight there. You saw it sat in there. but it didn't necessarily have the play or amount of movement that I'd like. So I'm just gonna take it. I'm gonna actually open up the hole a little bit more. I'm just gonna shave a little bit off real delicately. Let me adjust the tool rest real quick. Switching the parting tools here to a slightly different parting tool, so I have to adjust the rest to accommodate it. All right, so now we have the bottom of the box there. We're just turning it. And when we turn the box, one of the things is that the top of this box is going to end up in the chuck. So we're going to put the chuck jaws inside of it and opening it up inside. And because of that, you don't necessarily want to have a tapered lip on there. You want to have it as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. So that way when we put it over the end of the chuck, it fits without sliding out of the chuck. And this is a pretty intensive process of trial and error with trying the box. Does the box fit to the lid? And if it doesn't, we're just going to trim away a little bit more. It doesn't take much to just shave a little bit out of there. Let's see how this fits. Feeling good? All right. So you see how it spins there, and you see how when I apply side to side, it doesn't necessarily move side to side, but it allows me to spin it. So now we got it mounted back up. So what we did is we just put the box on the lid, and then we slid up the tailstock. And so now what I'm doing is I'm putting on the tool rest, and now's when we're going to shape the bottom of the box. And so when we shape the bottom of the box, we're going to shape the whole box. But mostly where you can remove material is the bottom. And so as you see, I'm going to start tapering off towards the base there. And I'm going to let the box tell me what it wants. All right. Does the box want to be round? Does the box want to have a sharp curve? Does it want to have a concave curve? Does it want to have a convex curve? How does the box want to be? And so we're just going to let the wood talk to us here as it tells us whether it wants us to take away more material or whether it feels just right the way it is. And so as we take away some material, this box is telling me that it likes to be scooped away right here towards the end. So that's going to give me a little foot on the bottom there. And so as we work the wood, we're going to see that it wants to have that little foot there. It feels pretty good cutting that. And so we're gonna actually have a relatively small foot, or what's going to appear to be a relatively small foot. It's going to be about 1 inch in diameter by the time we're done. And so we're just going to check, make sure that everything's smooth, that we don't have anything outstanding. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take real quick with the parting tool here. We're going to put a groove right around where the lid and the box meet. And what that's going to do is two things. One thing that I found is that you tend not to be perfectly center with the heads. And so when you have a little bit of a groove there, it throws off the feeling. And when we put a groove there, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to just be putting the groove there, and then I'm going to actually burn a ring on there. And that'll make it so that it's harder to tell any variation between the lid in the box. It might be some slight machine differences, or if you turn it slightly off center and you turn it, sometimes you put the lids on, they don't necessarily feel good. But if you have a ring there, the human fingers can't necessarily pick up the differences as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a groove there. And so this box is telling us that it wants 3 rings probably. Let's see. Might only want 2. I'm going to start off here with we're just putting the groove in there. We're going to use the side of the parting tool. Just put a little bit of a notch there. Just a small one. It says it feels a second ring there. So now we're burning in these rings real quick. We're just using a string there and burning in a ring. And what I'm doing is it's actually going to be a fat one for where the lid and the box part, and a thin one for the bottom of the box there. The top of the box said she doesn't need a ring, so we're just going to work our way here with the sandpaper, and we're going to actually finish up the outside of the box. And for the base, we're going to be finished after this step. So we're just going to smooth it out a little bit. We're going to work it, and we're going to work through the grits on the sandpaper. And once we get through all the grits, we're going to put some more friction polish on. And once we have the friction polish on, it's going to show us the what the base is going to look like. Now, if you notice the tailstock there, we have a base that's going to be pretty similar to the one that we had in the center. And so when we turn this off the lathe, what we're going to do is we're going to turn it down very thin. So we're first going to put on the polish, but at the bottom, if you notice where, well, it's kind of hard to see with the lighting actually, but the bottom where we're going to turn it off, there's a foot almost, and when we break it off, there's going to be a little bit of a protrusion that you can take out with a hand chisel or work it out by hand, however you feel. So now we've worked through the grits and we've got our polish on there, and we're just going to turn this foot off real quick. Or we're going to actually, it's not a foot, it's just, we're going to take it, well, we're going to finish out the foot really. I'm going to finish off the bottom of this box, just working our way through with the parting tool. Feeling pretty good about it, feeling pretty good. Now we're going to listen to the workpiece. You know, some of these pieces will allow you to cut through them real fast. Some of them say, you know, I don't really feel like being cut too fast. This piece right here is telling me that it likes to be cut at an okay pace. It doesn't necessarily like to be rushed through things, but it will allow me to work things off. So I'm just going to break the bottom off there by hand. And so now we flip the lid around on the top. We're going to finish out the top. With the top here, we're rolling off the foot. And so with the top of these boxes, I normally let the piece talk to me a little bit. Does the piece want to have a concave lid, a convex lid? You know, does it want to have a stepped lid? You know, because you can still leave a foot on the lid, but not necessarily one that the chuck has its teeth in. And so what does it want? And on this lid, we're going to go with a simple convex lid. I think that it'll really bring out the beautiful grain of the walnut, just a real simple grain. But that's okay, you know, you don't necessarily have to be a fancy grain to appreciate a simple finish. So we're just going to smooth it out a little bit. And as we work away, this is one of the reasons why when I was turning the lid on the inside, I didn't necessarily vault it too much. Because we're going to actually remove quite a bit of material with the tools as we work down that foot on the top. And so once we get through the tools cutting and we start sanding, then we're going to really have removed a lot of the lid or the potential lid space. And so now we've got that lid space taken off, or we got the lid worked down about as far as we really want to go with it. I find that leaving the lid about a 1/2 inch to less than 3/4 of an inch, probably about 5/8 of an inch thick. It's pretty good thickness. Probably about 1.5 centimeters for those of us who are not using the English standard here. And so now we're just going to go through the grits on the sanding. And as we sand on the lid, we can actually move through this quite quickly because there's not a lot of detail and the lid is pretty smooth. So the grits are not necessarily, this one said that it could go through pretty fast. Some of them, depending on the blank you're using, they might tell you to go through the grits a little bit slower, but you got to really listen to the workpiece that you're using. So now we're going to apply that friction polish again. Now this time for the lid, we're only going to really need one coat because we got a pretty good spread on it. It's pretty nice. The way that I apply it is just once it friction gets hot, it normally tells you when it's done. And we're going to pull this off and take a quick peek at it. All right, so there we see how the top of the box is looking. It's pretty simple. We have a little bit of old growth of the new grain in there. That's why you have that two-tone. And so now what we're going to do is I'm just going to bring up the base real quick here. Let's see. All right, there it is. So now we have the base and we have the top. And I don't know how well you can see this on camera, but there we are. So there you got a real simple top. You have two, top half, bottom half. Hopefully you can see whatever you want in here. Feel free to pause the video to take a closer look if you must. There you have the top of the box. Real simple grain, but it does look elegant with a simple form there. And so I just think that these boxes are quite beautiful, as is where they are. You see how smooth we got the top with just cutting it with a bowl gouge. Is pretty good. So let me see if we can find something here for contrast. Let's see. All right, so it looks like here we got a piece of the feed stock. So this is actually a stock that I took the piece from. And you can see that next to it, it's pretty elegant. And so there's the finished product. Hopefully you enjoyed, and thank you for your viewing experience.